Some women chase power. Some women carry it quietly, and the world doesn't notice until it's too late. The morning started like any other. Steel elevators hummed up the tower's spine. Glass doors clicked shut behind executives. Coffee cups steamed through tense conversations. Brian Wynne stood near the rear of the elevator, his usual place, silent, unreadable. In this building, he didn't speak unless it moved something. His company's logo shined from the top floors. His influence ran even deeper. As the elevator climbed, a woman stepped in, holding a stack of client files. She nodded to the janitor, then greeted the security guard by name. Her voice was soft but present, controlled, not timid. Brian noticed her. He'd seen her before, briefly from across the lobby or in meeting summaries. Charisse Ward worked in client relations for one of the private firms 3 floors below his. Always early, always calm. Today, something about her presence cut through the noise in his mind. She didn't try to shrink or be noticed. She just moved like she belonged. She didn't look up at him, didn't pause when the elevator chimed at his floor. She walked out, her steps quiet but certain. He stayed behind, watching the elevator close. For someone whose schedule overflowed with CEOs, investors and reporters, Brian rarely forgot faces. He didn't forget Charisse's, or the way she smiled at the janitor like it mattered. That same week, the building lost power. It happened late afternoon. Lights flickered. Screens blinked off. The high-rise's polished calm cracked in half. Phones lit up. Voices rose. On the 15th floor, panic scattered in quick bursts. Someone in accounting shouted for help. A delivery guy tripped near the stairwell, papers flying. Charisse didn't panic. She stood, straightened her skirt, and moved. She picked up scattered papers, reassured the receptionist, guided 2 elderly visitors to the stairs. "We'll take it slow," she said gently. "Hold the rail. I'm right here." She found a flashlight from the supply closet. She helped a delivery man call his manager. She calmed 3 different departments, all without raising her voice. From the stairwell above, Brian watched everything unfold. He'd been on a call when the power cut. Now he stood in the shadows, watching someone else take charge. She wasn't giving orders. She wasn't demanding attention. She simply acted with clarity, care, and confidence. And people followed. When the power returned 15 minutes later, Brian didn't return to his meeting. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, and let something unexpected settle in his chest. The next day he asked his assistant, "Who's the woman from downstairs?" "Client relations. Black hair. Carries herself like she doesn't owe anyone noise." His assistant blinked. "Charisse Ward. Quiet, no complaints. Works for Dellington Consulting." He said nothing else. But the name stayed. He didn't chase employees. He didn't blur boundaries. But Charisse wasn't forgettable. That Friday, late into the evening, his phone buzzed. A major investor had arrived unannounced, demanding clarification on documents held by Dellington Consulting. Frustrated, Brian called their office line. Most were gone, except her. "I'll bring the files up," she said. 10 minutes later, she stood at his office door. She wore a grey blouse tucked neatly into navy slacks. No makeup, hair pinned back. She didn't knock nervously. She simply arrived. He gestured her in. The city pulsed behind him, lights stretching past the glass wall behind his desk. "You stayed late," he said. "I needed to finish something," she replied. That was all. But something shifted in the silence. She laid the documents across his long conference table. He stepped beside her. They flipped through page after page, shoulders nearly touching. Their voices stayed low. His usual clipped tone softened. Her professional rhythm slowed. At one point, their hands reached for the same page. Their fingers brushed. Neither of them moved. She glanced up. His eyes met hers. There was no command in his gaze. Only pause. Only something real, waiting. He spoke quietly. "Are you comfortable?" She nodded. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't rehearsed. But it was mutual. He leaned in slowly. She tilted her head slightly. Their first kiss wasn't wild. It wasn't hurried. It was honest. He touched her waist gently. She rested a hand against his jaw. Every breath deepened the space they now shared. No one came in. No calls interrupted. The world, for once, was silent. Later that night, she walked back to her car, heart pounding but unshaken. She didn't regret it. She didn't run from it. He stood by the window, sleeves rolled to his elbows, staring at the door long after she left. He didn't regret it either. But they said nothing. The next week, the silence between them felt louder than before. In elevators, their eyes met, then quickly dropped. In meetings, their voices softened when they spoke to each other. Still, nothing was said. It wasn't denial. It was restraint. She didn't want to chase a man whose life moved too fast. He didn't want to pull a good woman into the chaos that followed him. But something unspoken had started, and neither of them knew it would grow louder with time. Charisse returned to work the following Monday dressed as she always did, neatly, modestly, without drawing attention. Her steps were calm. Her voice held its usual grace. But inside, something new lingered. She hadn't expected that night to stay with her. She thought it might dissolve like so many moments people never speak of again. Instead, it stayed close, familiar, warm, undeniable. Brian hadn't spoken to her since, but she felt him. In the hallway, on elevator rides, during brief interactions over documents. He never overstepped. He never spoke what was obvious. But his tone changed when he spoke her name. His gaze stayed longer. His energy, once cold and calculated, now paused when she entered a room. It would have been easier if he ignored her, but he didn't. That week, they passed each other near the break area. She nodded a soft hello. He returned it with a brief smile. Small, but real. His assistant stepped out of his office moments later, and Charisse saw how quickly. He turned his head again, as if catching one more glimpse of her grounded him. They both returned to their routines, but nothing was the same. Charisse found herself waking up earlier, dressing with slightly more attention. Not for seduction, for herself. She noticed how her confidence sat differently now, sharpened by the memory of being chosen in silence, not through showmanship. Brian noticed everything. The way she listened more than she spoke. The way she respected the cleaning crew the same way she respected board members. The way she stood still while others rushed to impress. He wasn't used to stillness meaning strength. Not until her. But even with all the silent exchange, neither of them acted on it. They didn't text. They didn't meet again privately. They let the space breathe. And that silence for a while worked, until Charisse realized her body was changing. It started subtly. Fatigue, slight nausea, a headache that wouldn't go away. She assumed it was stress, deadlines, long commutes. But then the signs grew clearer. Missed days on the calendar, tenderness, a flutter of fear. She waited another week. Then, one quiet Sunday morning, in her apartment's small bathroom, she stared down at the test strip that changed everything. Pregnant. She sat on the edge of her bed, her hand covering her mouth, trying to steady her thoughts. Her breath slowed, but her heart refused to calm. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't unprepared. But she was alone, and nothing in her world had trained her for this. Brian didn't know. She didn't tell him. Not because she wanted to keep the child from him, but because she didn't know what it would mean. She remembered how busy his office was, how reporters waited for him in the lobby, how his name flashed across financial news tickers. He carried a life of speed, power, scrutiny. She lived in the quiet. And this child needed peace. She didn't want to place a baby in the crosshairs of his world. Not yet. Over the next few days, Charisse watched Brian from a distance. Once, from the mezzanine above the lobby, she saw him exit a car with 2 high-level executives. He barely smiled. He carried the weight of 3 industries in his stride. She thought about what would happen if she told him now. Would he change? Would he want the baby? Would he try to fix it with money? Would he demand control? None of those questions felt fair, but they lived in her mind. So she made a decision. She submitted her resignation 2 weeks later. No drama, No explanation beyond personal reasons. Her supervisor looked surprised but didn't ask questions. Charisse had always done her job with quiet precision. No one expected a storm from her. She left the office after her final day without goodbye drinks or farewells. She didn't want the attention. Brian didn't hear until she was already gone. He entered the elevator expecting to see her that Monday morning, but the air felt different. Hollow. By noon he had already asked his assistant, "Where's Charisse Ward?" She resigned. "Sir, when?" "Friday. No notice? Just a letter." "That's all we received." Brian said nothing more, but his mood changed. He scanned every hallway that day, not consciously, not obviously, but he looked, and every time she didn't appear, his chest tightened. He didn't sleep well that week. He kept going through business proposals, investor decks, and strategy meetings, but nothing held weight. A name kept returning to his mind. He remembered how she stood beside him in the dark with quiet control. He remembered how she kissed him, slow, warm, not desperate. He remembered her smile as she left. And now she was gone. No message, no trace. And he didn't even know what she was carrying. Charisse moved to a quieter part of the city, one-bedroom apartment, closer to a small family clinic. She picked up part-time work at a local notary office and later freelanced for a business transcription service. She managed her budget with precision. Every week, she bought one small item for the baby, a pair of socks, a bottle, a blanket, a frame for a future photo. She didn't call friends. She didn't reach out to former co-workers. She kept her circle tight, her focus sharp. When the nurse asked if the father would be attending the next appointment, she said softly, "No, it's just me." At night, she lay with her hand on her growing belly and whispered, "You are safe. You are loved. I will protect you." And when she closed her eyes, the face she saw wasn't of a man who abandoned her. It was of a man who never got the chance to understand. She still believed Brian had a good heart, but she didn't know how to bring him into this without shattering everything. So she waited and hoped time would reveal the right moment. Charisse sat at her kitchen table, a chipped ceramic mug between her palms. Morning light streamed through the curtain, casting soft gold on her bare floor. She hadn't bought a rug yet. Rugs came after diapers, after baby lotion, after prenatal vitamins. Her life had narrowed to essentials: a wall calendar with circled dates, a folded copy of her lease agreement, a drawer filled with doctor's appointment slips and grocery coupons. She never expected motherhood to begin this way, alone between part-time jobs, in a city that moved too fast and cared too little. But she didn't complain. She didn't ask anyone to carry her choices. At night, she slept with a small notebook beside her pillow. Inside it, she wrote her baby letters. Some were short. "I heard your heartbeat today." Others were longer, I'm afraid. "But I'm trying." She never used Brian's name. Not yet, but she never pretended he didn't exist. On the other side of Atlanta, Brian worked longer hours than usual, but his mind refused to stay focused. He'd reviewed Charisse's personnel file twice, even though he wasn't supposed to. It said little. No disciplinary actions, no HR flags, no contact notes, just a quiet exit. She didn't even collect her last bonus, left it on the table. He couldn't stop thinking about that. It would have been easier if she'd taken the money. It would have told him she needed something from him. Instead, she walked away with nothing, like she never intended to stay, like he didn't matter. But he did, and that disturbed him more than he admitted. Charisse picked up a small client transcription job from a firm that didn't care about degrees or history, just clean audio and accurate typing. She made enough to cover rent and her next appointment. The clinic nurse, Marlene, smiled at her every visit. "Still on your own?" she asked once, kindly. Charisse nodded. "I'm okay." Marlene didn't push. "You're strong. But don't be afraid to need someone too." That night, Charisse wrote a longer entry in her notebook. "Today, I saw your hands on the screen. I watched you stretch. I don't know what name I'll give you yet, but I know this: you are mine." and you deserve more than fear. Weeks passed. Brian kept checking the elevator without realizing it. He stepped into the break room, paused in hallways, nodded to passing staff, hoping someone might say her name. No one did. Once, he lingered outside her old floor. Her desk was empty. He stood there, unmoving, until one of the interns stepped out and nervously avoided eye contact. Brian turned and left. At dinner with partners, he barely spoke. At a press conference, he shortened his speech by half. Something inside him was off balance, and nothing, not status, not routine, could fix it. Charisse felt her child kick for the first time while brushing her teeth. She froze, then laughed. It was small, like a nudge from within. It reminded her she wasn't walking this road alone anymore. She named the feeling hope. One evening, during a rare walk, she passed a baby boutique. The price tags hurt her chest. She walked past, but the window displayed a soft, knitted blanket, embroidered with a moon and stars. She came back 2 days later and bought it on sale. It sat folded in her closet, untouched, waiting for the day her child would be warm enough to use it. Meanwhile, Brian met with his legal team. They talked about mergers, lawsuits, tax incentives. He nodded when appropriate, but he didn't hear a word of it. His mind kept returning to the pause before Charisse left. Did she expect him to follow? Would he have? He didn't know then, but now he knew the answer was yes. And it might already be too late. On Charisse's 7th month, Marlene asked gently, "Have you thought about who'll be with you at delivery?" Charisse hesitated. "I haven't planned that far. You'll want someone who can speak if you can't. Even if it's just to hold your hand." Charisse left the clinic that day with a dull ache in her chest. Not sadness, not regret, just quiet reality. She pulled out her phone, scrolled to Brian's name. Her thumb hovered over the screen, but she locked it and slid it back into her pocket. Not yet. That night, she lit a candle on her kitchen table, the apartment quiet, except for a soft jazz station playing through an old speaker. She closed her eyes and whispered to the child inside her, "I'm doing this my way. I hope one day you'll understand." Across the city, Brian stood by the window in his office, lights dim, staring into the night. He didn't know why the silence bothered him more than any noise ever had. But deep inside, he knew something was coming, and it would change everything. The sky outside her window was grey when her first contraction hit. Charisse had just finished folding the last of the baby's clothes, tiny onesies, neutral colours, gently used. She paused, gripping the edge of the couch as the pressure rolled through her. Not pain, not yet, but a warning. She closed her eyes, counted her breath, waited. Another one came, stronger. Her hands trembled as she reached for her hospital bag. Everything she packed over the past few weeks sat in order: nightgown, socks, lotion, a picture of her mother folded inside a book of baby names. She called a cab. The ride was quiet. The driver didn't ask questions when he saw her hand on her belly and her deep, focused breathing. He just nodded and turned the music off. The city rolled by. Rain started to dot the windshield. Charisse stared straight ahead. She had no hand to hold, no voice reminding her to breathe. But she had something else, something steadier: determination. By the time she reached the hospital, the contractions had deepened. She was checked in quickly. The nurse took her gently by the arm. "First baby?" Charisse nodded. "You're doing great," the nurse said. "Let's get you settled." The next few hours blurred together. Pain came in waves. She leaned forward, gripping the bed rails, breathing through the tightness in her chest. Nurses coached her, rubbed her back, gave her sips of ice water. No one asked about the father. They saw the ringless hand, the steeled eyes. Charisse never screamed. She moaned, cried, and whispered to herself, "You are safe. You are loved. You are not alone." At sunrise, the hospital room dimmed as a new nurse stepped in. "Time to push," she said gently. Charisse nodded, jaw clenched, sweat dampening her hairline. Each push sent fire through her spine. Her arms trembled. Her breath caught. Her chest heaved. Then, a sound, small, sharp, real. The baby's cry broke through the fog. The nurse smiled. "You did it." Charisse opened her eyes. Tears slipped down without permission. The baby was placed on her chest, tiny, warm, wriggling, alive. A boy. He opened his eyes for a moment and closed them again, breathing fast and shallow against her. She touched his face, counted his fingers, and cried, not from fear, from the weight of love landing all at once. She named him Nerin. The nurse asked if she wanted to write a last name on the form. Charisse hesitated. "I'll do that later," she whispered. The nurse nodded and didn't push. Charisse spent the next day in the maternity room watching her son sleep. She didn't want to close her eyes. Every minute he existed, her heart reshaped itself. When she finally drifted off, she dreamed of nothing. Just peace. That week, her home became a nursery. The bassinet took up half her living room. Her fridge was stocked with prepped meals from a kind neighbor who'd seen her come home with the baby. A diaper bag hung on the back of her door. At night, she fed him with one hand while flipping pages of parenting guides with the other. She sang softly when he fussed. She cried sometimes too, not because she doubted herself, because she finally understood how deeply a person could love someone they'd only just met. Meanwhile, Brian stood in his office, looking at the skyline with a gnawing sense of loss he couldn't name. He had everything, yet he felt like he'd missed something that couldn't be bought, built, or negotiated. He hadn't seen her in months, but her presence had never left him. Once, in the middle of a board meeting, he reached for a folder and froze, remembering her hand brushing his that night. His chest tightened. His assistant's voice faded into static. In her apartment, Charisse began writing again. Not letters to the baby, but to Brian. She didn't send them. She folded them into her notebook. "I see him in the way he sleeps, with his arms above his head. He has your eyebrows. Not your frown, though, thank God. I don't want to keep him from you. I just don't want him to be forgotten." 2 months passed. Then 3. Charisse returned to part-time work remotely. She held Nerin on her lap during breaks. She rocked him with her foot while typing client notes. She kept their life slow, stable, and small. Until one afternoon, during a clinic visit, everything shifted. Marlene smiled while holding Nerin. "I thought I saw you on Peachtree a few days ago," she said. "But you were with someone." Charisse shook her head. "I haven't been on that street in weeks." "Oh, maybe it was someone else." "But a man stopped to wave at you." "I thought you knew him." Charisse froze. "What did he look like?" "Tall, sharp suit, white guy, business type." "He didn't look like he belonged near the clinic, honestly." Marlene smiled casually and moved on. But Charisse's heart pounded, because she knew who it was. That night, she rocked her son to sleep slowly, her eyes locked on the front door. Did he see them? Was it chance? Or had fate finally placed her truth in his path? Have you ever carried a truth so heavy you didn't know who would still love you once it was spoken? If this moment touched you, drop a comment below and tell us your thoughts. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who believes in quiet strength, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. Brian Wynne hadn't slept properly in weeks, not from insomnia, but because something unspoken had carved its way into his thoughts and wouldn't let go. Every time his phone buzzed, every time he passed the 15th floor, he thought of her. Charisse Ward, the woman who had carried herself with quiet dignity, even in chaos. The woman who had stood beside him for one night that should have been forgettable, but wasn't. And now, she was gone. No resignation meeting, no goodbye, no closure, and no trace of why. He told himself to move on. People leave jobs, life moves forward. But nothing about Charisse felt like a casual ending. There was too much left unsaid, too much he didn't understand, and now someone had seen her, with a baby. He replayed the conversation from the fundraiser. She looked happy, the woman had said, almost casually. She was carrying a baby. I didn't get to speak with her. Brian hadn't asked for details. He'd simply gone quiet, then left the event mid-speech. The moment he got home, he poured a drink, sat in silence, and let one question burn through everything. Was the baby mine? The timing made sense. She disappeared months after their night together. There had been no rumors, no complaints, no friction, just quiet distance, and now a child. His child. The possibility shook something in him deeper than ambition or guilt. It touched the one part of him he'd buried, long before the boardrooms, long before the high-rises, the part of him that wanted to matter beyond numbers. By morning, he couldn't sit still. He asked his assistant to pull Charis's personnel records again. Not her files, her emergency contacts. It was against policy. He didn't care. One name came up. A woman named Elise. No last name. Just a number. He dialed it. No answer. He tried again 3 hours later. Still nothing. On the third attempt, a woman picked up. Cautious. Older. Yes? I'm looking for Charis Ward. I worked with her months ago and need to return something personal. The voice paused. You from that office tower? Yes. She doesn't work there anymore. I know. I just need to reach her. Another pause. Why now? Brian swallowed. Because I believe she had a child, and I believe he's mine. The line went silent. Then the woman gave him an address. It wasn't far, just across town, in a neighborhood where the buildings were smaller and the silence was deeper. He didn't bring anything with him. No driver, no security, just keys, wallet, nerves. He parked on the street and stared at the small apartment building for 5 full minutes before moving. What if she slammed the door? What if she didn't answer? What if the baby wasn't his? Worse, what if he was? He knocked 3 times. No sound. Then, soft footsteps inside. The door opened slowly. Charis stood there, hair pulled back, eyes wide with disbelief, baby in her arms. Brian stared. She didn't speak. Neither did he. He looked at the child, then at her. His voice, when it came, was low and steady. Is he mine? Charis's lips parted. No lies. No resistance. Yes. Brian didn't move. He didn't push his way in. He didn't raise his voice. He just stood there, looking at her, then at the small boy who now blinked up at him with calm, curious eyes. He took a breath. May I come in? Charis stepped aside. The apartment was modest, clean, lived in. No designer furniture, no luxury art, just warmth. A blanket tossed over the back of the couch, a baby bottle on the table, a soft lullaby playing faintly from a speaker. He sat on the edge of the couch. The baby made a small sound. Brian's hands rested in his lap, unsure of what to do. Charis held Nerin against her shoulder, rocking him gently. The silence between them felt heavy, but not hostile. I wasn't hiding him, she said softly. I believe you. I didn't want to bring pressure into his life. I would have wanted to know. I know. Brian's eyes stayed on the baby. I don't want to rush anything, he said. But I want to understand. Charis nodded, still swaying gently. She walked over, stopping in front of him. You can hold him. He hesitated, then slowly reached out his arms. Nerin looked at him, then settled in his chest with a sigh. Brian's breath hitched. His arms locked carefully around the tiny body. The room blurred at the edges. This wasn't a deal. This wasn't a title. This was real. The weight of Nerin in his arms was unlike anything Brian had ever held, not because of the baby's size, but because of what the moment meant. This child, his child, was real. Warm, fragile, breathing softly against his chest. He had faced courtroom threats, billion-dollar decisions, and national press without blinking. But this undid him quietly. Charis watched from the edge of the couch, arms folded, eyes not cold, but guarded. She wasn't waiting for a meltdown. She was waiting to see who he really was now that the truth was no longer hidden. Brian didn't hand Nerin back too quickly. He held him with both hands, supported his head, watched the baby's tiny fingers curl against his shirt. No designer suit, no boardroom shine, just a man learning how to be present. Charis's voice broke the silence. He likes classical music. And jazz, but not violins. They make him fussy. Brian nodded. Noted. He sleeps best if he's walked a bit before laying down. I'll remember that too. He wasn't trying to earn her favor. He was anchoring himself in the rhythm she had mastered alone. When it was time to leave, he stood slowly, Nerin now resting quietly in his arms. I'll come back tomorrow, Brian said. Charis nodded, surprised by the calm in his tone. You don't have to. I want to. She studied him for a moment. I won't let him be disappointed. I'm not asking for you to perform, she replied. Just show up. I will. And he did. Every day. No entourage, no flashy car, no loud declarations. He arrived quietly with groceries, bottles, diapers, sometimes lunch for her. He sat on the floor with Nerin and made ridiculous faces. He watched Charis feed him, change him, calm him. He didn't try to take over. He learned. The third night, after putting Nerin to sleep, Brian remained seated on the couch. Charis brought tea in 2 mugs. She sat across from him. He looked tired, not in the corporate way, but in the way of someone doing emotional labor for the first time. Charis broke the silence. You don't look like the man I met in that office. He gave a soft laugh. I don't feel like him. You used to talk with your jaw clenched. I still do. She smiled lightly. Less now. Brian looked around her home, small, clean, lived in. He imagined what her days looked like, carrying this alone, without calling him, without asking for help. He set the mug down. I don't know how to thank you for keeping him safe, for loving him, even when you had no one. Charis's eyes lowered. You don't have to thank me. He's my son. Brian looked directly at her. He's mine too, and I intend to be his father, not just biologically, not from a distance. Her silence said more than any test would. He came back every night. Some days, he walked Nerin in the hallway just to give her 10 minutes to rest. Other days, he sat quietly and listened as she explained what the baby liked, what she was learning, what scared her most. He didn't try to fix things. He just listened. That's what made the difference. A week later, she handed him a bottle. He's been cranky all day. If he falls asleep while feeding, don't move too fast. Let his head rest. Brian nodded and took the bottle. He settled into the armchair, Nerin cradled gently in his arms. The baby latched without protest. Charis stood a few feet away, arms crossed again, watching. Brian glanced up. I'll keep showing up, even when it's hard, even when you don't know if you can count on me. Charis didn't speak, but she didn't look away. Later that evening, after Nerin finally slept, Brian pulled on his jacket. At the door, he turned back. I don't expect forgiveness overnight, or trust. Charis tilted her head. Then what do you expect? Time, he said, and the chance to prove I'm not the man you feared I was. She didn't answer, but she didn't close the door on him either. And sometimes that was the beginning. Charis stood at the kitchen sink rinsing a bottle when she heard the key in the door. Brian had started knocking the first few visits. She'd always opened quickly, as if expecting him. Then she handed him a copy of the spare key without saying much. I'm not giving you rights, she had said flatly. I'm giving you responsibility. He took it without flinching. Now, the soft click of the door meant routine, meant he was back. He stepped in quietly and removed his shoes near the entryway, like he'd learned to. He wore no tie today, just a black sweater and dark jeans. In his hand, a single bag with Nerin's favorite teething ring and baby wipes. He'd remembered she mentioned they were running low. Charis didn't greet him immediately. She dried her hands, placed the bottle upside down on a towel, and only then turned around. You're early, she said. He gave a small nod. Traffic was light. He didn't try to force small talk. He walked over to where Nerin lay in a portable bassinet near the couch and leaned down. Hey, little guy. The baby gurgled at the sound of his voice. Charis watched, arms folded loosely. He's been calm today, like his mother, Brian said without looking up. She didn't respond, but her lips curved slightly before she turned away. That evening, Brian held Nerin for hours. He fed him, burped him, cleaned him after a minor spit-up. When the baby drifted off against his chest, Brian stayed still, letting the child's warmth sink deep into him. Charisse watched from the hallway, unseen. This wasn't an act. This wasn't guilt. It was quiet effort, daily, repeated. But she still couldn't bring herself to believe he would stay. She had seen too many men retreat when things grew heavy. Later, she placed dinner on the table, simple pasta and sautéed vegetables. Brian pulled out her chair before taking his seat. They ate in relative silence, not awkward, not cold, just cautious. Midway through the meal, he spoke. "You used to keep a notebook at your desk." She glanced up, surprised. "You noticed that?" "I notice a lot more than people think." She took a bite. "It wasn't for work. I used to write when I needed to center myself." "What do you write now?" She paused, then answered honestly. "Letters to Nerin, thoughts I'm too tired to say out loud." Brian nodded. "Would you ever let me read one?" Charisse met his eyes. "Would you be ready for what they say?" He held her gaze. "I'd want to know." Even the hard parts. They didn't say more, but something shifted in the quiet between them. Later that week, Brian showed up with a small journal of his own, leather-bound, new. He placed it on the table beside her folded laundry. "What's that?" she asked. "Letters from me." To him, she stared at the journal. "You've already started. I've been writing every night after I leave." She picked it up slowly, flipped to the first page. His handwriting was bold but clean. The first line read, "I'm learning how to show up for you before I teach you how to be a man." Her throat tightened. She didn't say thank you, but she didn't hand it back either. One evening, while Nerin slept, they sat side by side on the couch. No contact. Just proximity. Brian spoke without looking at her. "I used to think legacy was about what I built." She stayed quiet, waiting. "But now I think it's about who I show up for." Charisse turned her head toward him. "What happens when showing up stops being new?" she asked. "When the visits turn into expectations? When he cries through the night or gets sick and everything's hard?" "I stay," he said simply. She studied his profile. "You sound sure." "I am." Charisse lowered her voice. "Don't say that unless you mean it." "I do." Later, as Brian stood to leave, she walked him to the door like she always did. He turned, one hand on the knob. "I'm not asking for us. Not yet. I'm not pushing anything." Charisse's eyes searched his. "Then, what are you asking for?" "A place," he said quietly. "With both of you. Earned, not expected." She didn't answer right away, but she didn't close the door after him either. That night, she opened her journal and wrote, "He's showing up. But I don't know if I believe in the middle yet. The beginning is easy. The end is easier. But what if this is the part that matters most?" She didn't sign it. She just folded the page, closed the book, and laid down next to her sleeping son. The next morning started with sunlight and a soft cry. Charisse was already halfway to Nerin's bassinet before her eyes opened fully. She scooped him up, pressing his warm cheek to her chest. His cries weren't loud, just tired, restless. She hummed gently and walked slowly around the room. She hadn't seen Brian in 2 days, not because he vanished, but because he had a board meeting and warned her ahead of time. Still, the silence felt heavier than she expected. She didn't want to admit she noticed his absence, didn't want to admit she missed his knock. She sat in the rocker, feeding Nerin in the morning quiet, and stared at the framed photo she had printed last week. Brian holding their son. A soft smile. Nerin's tiny fist curled around his father's finger. She hadn't expected him to look so full in that picture, like a man who'd found something real. But photographs could lie. People could too. And her fear was old. Not about Brian himself, but about what power, money, and pressure could do to a man's promises. That afternoon, she ran errands. grocery store, pharmacy, a stop at the baby consignment shop. While in line, she overheard two women behind her whispering about someone at the front of the store. "That's Brian Wynn, isn't it?" "Yeah, the one from those real estate ads. He's on TV all the time. Looks even better in person." Charisse didn't turn around. She didn't need to. Brian's voice came from behind her as he spoke softly to the cashier. Picking up a formula brand she mentioned to him a week earlier. He didn't see her yet. She paid quickly, heart pounding, and stepped outside into the cool air. She needed to breathe, to think. He came out moments later and stopped when he saw her near the bench. "You were inside." She nodded. "Didn't know you'd be here. I remembered you said they carry that brand. Figured I'd stock your shelf." She hesitated. "You didn't have to. I wanted to." His tone was steady. No apology, no excuse. She appreciated that more than she wanted to admit. But still, her guard stayed up. "Brian," she said, lowering her voice. "People know you. They recognize you. You live in a world where stories spread fast. And I'm not built for that kind of exposure. I'm not here to expose you. Then what are you here to do?" He looked at her, eyes clear. "Stay," he said, "even when it's inconvenient, even when it's not perfect." Especially then. She nodded once. But her silence said, "We'll see." That night, she wrote in her journal again. "I want to believe he means it. But I've watched men shift when eyes start watching. What if this isn't about us, but about reputation?" She closed the book, but didn't put it away. She wanted to remember how unsure she felt. If he proved her wrong, she wanted to honor the journey, not pretend it was always easy. The next day he came early again. No announcement. He walked in holding a stack of folded baby towels and her favorite takeout. Charisse had just finished changing Nerin. "You're back," she said, setting the wipes aside. "I told you I would be." She stared at the bag. "You remembered my order." "Of course." He didn't reach for her, didn't crowd the room. He moved gently. She handed him the baby. "He's been gassy today. Hold him upright." He took Nerin with a familiarity that no longer surprised her. "I'll walk him while you eat." "You sure?" "Positive." She sat down at the table, opened the box, and watched him pace with Nerin by the window. He hummed a song under his breath. The baby calmed quickly. For the first time, her heart eased just a little. After dinner, they sat across from each other. "I know you still don't trust me completely," Brian said. Charisse didn't deny it. "You're right. I'm not asking you to rush that. But you're waiting for it," she said. "I'm showing up whether it happens or not." That stopped her, because he didn't say it to win points. He said it like it was the only thing that made sense. He left late that evening. Before he stepped out, he turned and said, "Next week, I want to take Nerin for the morning. Give you a break, go see a friend, or sleep, or walk." Charisse didn't respond right away, but the next day she circled the upcoming Wednesday on her calendar, not because she needed time off, but because it would tell her one thing. Would he come back on a day that didn't benefit him? Wednesday morning arrived with soft rain tapping the window and the smell of oatmeal on the stove. Charisse checked the time twice. She wasn't nervous. She was prepared. Nerin's bag sat by the door. Extra clothes, formula, wipes, two of his favorite toys, and a detailed sheet she printed and folded. The paper listed everything: feeding times, nap cues, what his different cries meant. She knew Brian probably wouldn't need all of it, but she needed to give it, to feel like she wasn't handing her son over blindly. She placed a hand on the baby's back as he kicked in his playmat. "You've got your dad's frown," she whispered. "Don't tell him I said that." A knock sounded, not rushed, just steady. She opened the door. Brian stood in a rain jacket, hair damp, smile small but solid. He reached forward without hesitation, scooping Nerin into his arms. "Morning," he said. "You're early." "I like watching him wake up." She didn't push back, only handed him the bag. The printed sheets a little thorough. He gave a light chuckle. "I expected a laminated handbook." "Don't tempt me." They exchanged a look, not playful, not formal, Familiar, real. He left after 10 minutes, strapping Nerin safely into the car seat and double-checking the buckles twice. Charisse watched from the doorway, arms crossed, unsure whether the tightness in her chest was fear or trust being stretched open. She didn't cry. She didn't text. She just waited and gave herself permission to breathe. For the first time in months, Charisse had a full morning to herself. She cleaned without interruption, folded laundry without balancing a baby on her hip. She brewed tea and drank it warm. She sat by the window with a book and actually turned the pages, but she didn't lose track of time. When the clock hit 11:58, she was already pacing. At 12:03, she heard the key in the lock. Brian stepped in holding Nerin, who was babbling with the energy of someone who'd had a good morning. "We went to the botanical gardens," Brian said, unzipping his coat. He stared at a leaf for 5 minutes. "I respect it." Charisse raised a brow. "You took him out in the rain?" Umbrella covered the stroller. Didn't rush. She took Nerin into her arms. The baby smiled, then reached back toward Brian briefly. That made her pause. He hadn't been gone long, but already Nerin reached for him. And her heart didn't break, it warmed. Later, after Nerin napped, she set out lunch for both of them. Brian looked more relaxed than usual. Not like a man visiting, like someone easing into something permanent. Charisse finally asked, "What changed you?" He didn't pretend not to understand. "My father," he said simply. "He left early, worked non-stop, thought money was enough. I always said I wouldn't be him. Then I looked up and realized I was becoming him in silence." Charisse stayed still. "I didn't want to wake up one day with a legacy and no child who actually knew me." She looked at him. "And what about us?" He met her eyes. "I haven't earned that answer yet." That night, after he left, she held Nerin and whispered, "He held you right. He brought you back safe. And he looked at you like you're the only thing that matters." She kissed the baby's forehead, settled him in his crib, and stood at the doorway for a long moment. Something in her had shifted. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of belief. The next morning, she woke up and found a sticky note on the door. Brian's handwriting was clean, direct. "I'll be back with breakfast. Don't cook. You've done enough already." For the first time in a long while, she smiled before even brushing her teeth. Charisse didn't expect the knock the next morning. She opened the door half-dressed, expecting a delivery. Instead, Brian stood there with a bag of warm food and 2 coffees. "You said pancakes were your weakness," he said with a slight grin. "I listened." She stepped aside, surprised but not startled. He walked in like he didn't need permission, but waited for it anyway. "You're early," she said again. "I figured you'd still be wearing that 'I can do everything myself' cape." She raised an eyebrow. "You're getting bold." "I've earned a little," he replied, unpacking the food. "Besides, I'm not here to impress you." "Then why are you here?" "To keep showing you I'm not leaving." She didn't smile, but she didn't roll her eyes either. They ate breakfast sitting across from each other on the floor while Nerin played between them. His toys rattled as he babbled, kicking wildly at a soft book. "He's strong," Brian said. Charisse nodded. "He kicked so hard the first time I felt him, I thought something was wrong." "You didn't tell anyone, did you?" "No." He studied her for a long moment. "You went through that entire pregnancy without leaning on anyone." Charisse looked down. "I didn't know how to." "You don't have to keep doing that." She didn't argue. But she didn't agree yet either. Later, while Nerin napped, Brian offered to help clean the bottles. Charisse didn't fight him. She handed them over, watching as he rolled up his sleeves. "You do that like someone who's had practice," she said. "I don't," he replied. "I Googled it last night." She raised a brow. "You Googled bottle cleaning?" "I didn't want to get it wrong." The answer hit harder than she expected. "You're trying—" "I have to." "No, you don't," she said. "That's what makes this confusing." He turned the faucet off. "I didn't show up because I had to. I showed up because I want to be part of my son's life. And part of yours. The right way." Charisse leaned against the counter, arms crossed, What's the right way? With no pressure, no deadlines, just truth. That night, after he left, she pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and opened her journal. He's learning my world, without asking me to leave it, and that might be the most loving thing a man has ever done for me. She didn't write his name, but she thought it, over and over. 2 days later, they took Nerin for a walk in the park. No stroller, just Brian holding him in the carrier and Charisse walking beside him with a small bag on her shoulder. The air was crisp. Trees swayed gently. People passed them, but no one stared. For once, Charisse didn't worry about what people thought. Brian wasn't rushing ahead. He wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't using this for image or approval. He was present, and it was peaceful. They stopped by a bench. Nerin slept against his father's chest. Brian looked over and said, "This feels like the first time I've breathed in years." Charisse didn't answer. She just looked at him and saw the man he had become. Not powerful, not perfect, just there. That night, Brian walked them back upstairs. He placed a hand on the doorframe before leaving. "I don't know what you're ready for." Charisse stepped closer. "Neither do I. But when you are, I'll be here." She nodded. "You've been here." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to move if she needed to. She didn't. Their lips met, soft, slow, respectful. Not desperate, not performative, just real. When they parted, she didn't speak. He smiled faintly, nodded, and walked away. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone after the door closed. Charisse stood in the kitchen that morning, staring at the note Brian left the night before. Lunch with just us. No noise, no titles. Bring Nerin. There was no signature, just his handwriting, simple and even, like the man he'd become over the past few months. She folded the note and tucked it into the inside pocket of her diaper bag. She didn't know what lunch with just us meant, but she trusted the direction enough to show up. They met at a small cafe tucked behind a bookstore. No media, no luxury cars, no expensive restaurant table with staff hovering. Just a quiet corner with 2 plates already waiting, and a baby seat folded beside him. Brian stood when she arrived. "I made sure it was quiet," he said. Charisse looked around. "This isn't what I expected." He smiled. "That's the point." They ate slowly, talked about sleep patterns, which formula Nerin liked best, and whether Brian had ever changed a diaper in a public bathroom. He had, and it didn't go well. They laughed, not loudly, but real. Charisse leaned back after a while, watching Nerin doze in the seat beside her. "You're getting good at this," she said. "I'm trying to learn as fast as I can. You don't have to be perfect." "I'm not aiming for perfect," Brian said. "I'm aiming for present." After lunch, they walked through the bookstore. Brian picked up a copy of a children's storybook with animals and soft pastel drawings. He flipped through the pages, then handed it to her. "For bedtime," he said. "You're stocking his bookshelf now. I figured I should earn a shelf first." She smirked and tucked the book under her arm. "Slowly," she said. "One title at a time." Back at her apartment, Nerin napped while Charisse folded laundry, and Brian stood at the window, quietly watching the street below. "Do you miss it?" she asked from the sofa. "Miss what?" "The rush, the pressure, the noise." He turned around. "Sometimes. But I miss this more." She set the folded shirt aside. "You didn't know this existed until recently." "I knew something was missing," he said. "I just didn't know what to call it." She studied him. "And now I call it peace." They didn't touch. They didn't rush into anything physical. But there was intimacy in the way he dried a bottle without being asked, in the way he picked up a pacifier from under the crib and sanitized it without being told, in the way he lowered his voice when the baby stirred. Like this space was sacred, not secondary. That night, after Brian left, Charisse opened her journal again. He doesn't talk about what he's given up. He doesn't talk about what he's done. He just shows up. And that silence is louder than every promise I've ever been given. She tucked the journal away and sat by the window, Nerin asleep in the next room. The city moved outside, loud and endless. But inside, her world was finally starting to soften. 2 days later, Brian showed up with a folded document. "I thought you should have this," he said. She unfolded it. It was a notarized form, adding Nerin's name to his will. No lawyers involved, no headlines, just his signature. And his son's first name in bold. Charis's fingers trembled slightly. "You didn't have to do this. I know. I haven't even given him a last name yet. I didn't ask you to." She looked up. "So why?" He spoke carefully. "Because I'm not here to lay claim. I'm here to claim responsibility." She stared at the paper for a long moment, then quietly folded it again and didn't give it back. Charis sat across from Brian later that afternoon. Nerin was asleep on a folded blanket nearby, one hand curled beneath his cheek. She held the folded will document again, not for review, just for weight. "This makes it real," she said quietly. "It was always real," Brian replied. "This just proves I'm not running from it." She nodded slowly. "My Aunt Elise wants to meet you." He blinked. "The one who gave you the emergency apartment when you left?" "Yes, that's a big step." "I know." Brian set down his cup and leaned forward slightly. "What does she know?" "Everything but the baby being yours." He didn't flinch. Then, "Let's tell her." "You're sure?" "I'd rather face 1,000 difficult truths than spend one more day being left out of yours." They met Elise 2 days later on a quiet Sunday. Charis dressed Nerin in a soft grey onesie. She wore jeans and a navy sweater. Nothing formal, no need to prove anything. Brian arrived exactly on time. No gifts, no distractions, just him. Elise opened the door, warm but cautious. She studied Brian with a sharp gaze, then looked to Nerin, who was resting on Charis's chest. "Looks like someone has his father's eyes," she said. Charis blinked. Brian spoke first. "Yes, Mum." "And his mother's strength." Elise didn't smile right away, but she stepped back and let them in. The visit was short, polite, measured. Elise asked direct questions. Brian answered them without defense. "No, I didn't know until recently." "Yes, I understand what she's carried." "No, I'm not here to take over. I'm here to be accountable." After 30 minutes, Elise walked to the kitchen to refresh the tea. Charis followed. "You trust him?" Elise asked softly. "I'm starting to." Elise placed a hand on hers. "Then don't stop him. But don't forget who you are when he's near." Charis nodded once. "I haven't." That evening, Brian walked Charis and Nerin back to their door. He didn't speak until the key turned in the lock. "You looked nervous back there," he said. "She's important to me. And so are you." She turned, her back to the door. "You didn't try to impress her. I wasn't there for her approval." "Then why did you come?" "To honor the fact that you don't live your life in pieces. And if I'm going to be in it, I need to understand all of it." She looked at him, the air between them thinner than it had ever been. "Thank you," she said. He stepped closer. "This is the beginning, Charis, not the peak." Her breath slowed. "I know." After he left, she opened her journal one more time. "He stood inside my real life today. Not my silence, not my plan, my life." And he didn't flinch. She tucked the journal under her pillow and kissed Nerin's forehead as he slept. What would you do if someone came back? Not with promises, but with presence. If this story moved you, hit like, share it with someone who believes in quiet second chances, and drop a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful love stories that begin with truth. The morning felt still. Charis stood by the window, her fingers wrapped around a warm mug. Nerin was asleep, arms splayed across his tiny chest, his slow breathing like a metronome in the quiet apartment. Brian had visited every day that week. He didn't ask for more. He didn't push for answers. But Charis knew something had shifted inside her. She no longer waited for him to leave. She began to wait for him to stay. That evening, Brian invited them both to his apartment for the first time. Not the high-rise office suite, not the penthouse downtown. His home, just outside the city, tucked in a quiet cul-de-sac where the front yard was trimmed by hand, and the porch light flickered slightly at night. "I bought it before I became that guy," he said with a crooked smile. "Kept it because it reminds me who I was before noise took over." Charisse stepped inside, surprised by how warm it felt. Not showy, not designed to impress. Photos of landscapes on the wall, a record player by the corner, books with page-worn spines on the shelves. She placed Nerin's bag near the couch and unbuckled him from his car seat. Brian took the baby gently and walked him into the living room, humming a lullaby she'd sung weeks earlier. She followed and sank into the armchair. "You said you didn't expect to be a father," she said softly. "I didn't," he replied, "but I'm trying to be one like it was always the plan." Dinner was simple: grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, soft bread, water with lemon. Nothing extravagant, just intention. After they ate, Brian washed the dishes while Charisse bounced Nerin near the window. When he returned, he sat beside them. "Do you ever wonder what this could have been if we hadn't waited?" he asked. She shook her head. "If we rushed it, we might have ruined it." "You still afraid I'll leave?" "Sometimes. I'm still afraid I'll mess it up." "Why?" "Because you're the first person I've shown the quiet side of me to, and you didn't ask for it. You just made room for it." They sat in silence, not tense, not unsure, just full. Then Brian stood, took Nerin gently from her arms, and carried him upstairs. She followed, slowly, surprised when he opened a softly lit room with a crib already assembled. Decor minimal, clean, calm. "I thought he should have a place here too." She stepped in, words caught behind her ribs. "You planned all this?" "I built it over time," he said. "Didn't want to bring it up until I knew I meant it." Charisse stood by the crib, her hand brushing the edge. Then her voice lowered. "I've never had a man build something for me without asking what he'd get in return." Brian stepped beside her. "I'm not here for a return," he said. "I'm here for the long story." That night, back at her apartment, she rocked Nerin in her arms and whispered, "You're going to have a room at his place. And it's not about wealth, it's about space. Space we never asked for, but he gave anyway." The next morning, her phone buzzed with a news alert. Brian Wynne spotted with unidentified woman and child in suburb. A grainy photo showed them entering his home. Her heart stopped. She clicked on the article. It was short, nothing damning. No names, no accusations, just speculation. But it was enough. Brian hadn't told her this would happen. And now, the silence she trusted had turned into a headline. She called him immediately. "I saw the article," she said without greeting. "I know. You didn't warn me. I didn't know it was coming. You should have expected it." He didn't deny it. "I'm handling it," he said. "It'll be pulled by morning." Charisse's voice lowered. "I asked for quiet, and I've given you that. This doesn't feel like quiet." There was a pause. Then he asked, "Do you regret coming?" She hesitated. "No, but I'm scared of what comes next." "So am I." Charisse didn't sleep much that night. The article had been pulled, just as Brian promised. But the damage had already been done, not to her reputation, not even to Brian's. It had been done to her sense of safety. For months, she built her world in shadows. Quiet routines, no attention, no assumptions. Now, her name wasn't public. Her face wasn't in the frame. But it was close, too close. And that was enough. Brian called early. "I'd like to stop by," he said. Charisse paused. "What for?" "I want to listen, not defend." She let silence answer for a moment, then said, "Come alone." He arrived with no flowers, no gifts, just himself. She opened the door, stepped back, and folded her arms. He didn't try to close the distance. "I saw the photo again," she said. "People guessed. You're a public figure. I knew this might happen. I just didn't think it'd come so soon." "I didn't either. I told you I didn't want noise." "You're not the noise," Brian said. "The world is. And I can't silence them. but I can make sure they know what matters." Charisse's voice softened. "Which is you, Nerin. This family. Whether or not they get a headline out of it." She looked at him, eyes unreadable. "I didn't ask to be part of your empire, Brian. I didn't ask to be folded into your brand. And I haven't tried to sell you," he said. "That photo was taken from across the street. I didn't invite cameras. I didn't set this up. Then why didn't you keep us further away?" He exhaled. "Because I was proud." The words caught her off guard. Not boastful, not loud, just real. "I wasn't showing you off," he continued. "I was showing up with you. And I'm not going to pretend you don't exist just to make the world comfortable." Charisse's arms slowly dropped. Her voice softened too. "So what now?" "We draw a line," Brian said. "Together. And anyone who steps over it will find me standing on it first." She stared at him. "Are you willing to lose people over this?" "I already have," he said. "But I'm not losing you." Later that evening, she sat beside him on the couch, Nerin curled asleep on Brian's chest. "I've never been claimed in a way that didn't feel like possession," she said. Brian looked down at their son, then up at her. "This isn't about claiming," he said. "This is about covering, with peace, with action, with presence." Charisse swallowed. "You don't need to fix me." "I'm not trying to," he said. "I'm trying to meet you where you already are." The next day, Brian posted a short message on his business social feed. "Privacy is sacred. But hiding the people who changed my life is not strength. It's fear. And I'm done hiding. No names, no photos." But the message was loud and personal. It went viral within hours. And Charisse, sitting beside the crib feeding Nerin, read it in silence. She didn't text him, but she whispered, "Thank you." That night, as the city moved outside, Brian stood by the apartment window while Charisse changed Nerin. She turned, baby on her hip, and asked quietly, "If this keeps getting louder, will you still come back?" Brian stepped closer, his voice low and steady, only louder than them. "If you want me to be." She didn't answer with words. She stepped forward, placed Nerin in his arms, and let her fingers rest against his. Not for reassurance, but for connection. The next morning began with sunlight sneaking through half-open blinds and the low hum of Nerin's breathing in the baby monitor. Charisse stretched quietly, barefoot on the hardwood floor, her mind still piecing together the emotions from the day before. Brian's post hadn't just gone viral. It started conversations, quiet ones. A few of her former co-workers texted her, "Is it true?" One said, "Didn't expect him to be the type to show up like that." She didn't respond, because it wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about presence, and his was consistent. At 10 a.m. Brian showed up, again without asking. But this time, he didn't come with diapers or food or a pacifier tucked in his coat pocket. He walked in holding a flat envelope and a steady look in his eyes. Charisse raised a brow. "Another legal document?" He shook his head and offered it without a word. She opened it slowly. Inside was a letter, handwritten, not printed, not signed by a notary, just ink, paper, and Brian. She read silently. "To the woman who taught me that quiet isn't weakness, that stillness can carry more strength than shouting. You gave my son his first safe home, his first heartbeat of comfort, and you gave me something I never knew I was missing. Accountability that didn't come with judgment. I've rewritten everything because of one night, not out of guilt, but gratitude, and I don't want to build my legacy unless it includes both of you. There's no pressure, just one promise. You will never raise him alone again." Charisse folded the letter with slow hands. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just sat down, like her legs needed a moment to catch up with her chest. Brian sat beside her. Neither of them looked at each other, until she asked, "Why write it instead of say it?" "I needed it to live somewhere, even if I wasn't in the room." She nodded slowly. "Where do we go from here?" Brian answered without hesitation, "We keep building, whatever you're ready for." however slow. That afternoon they took Nerin to a small park tucked between two quiet blocks. Charisse watched Brian carry their son down the path, narrating every bird and tree and patch of sunlight like he was introducing him to the world. She stood back for a moment, watching both of them. Her past life had been filled with exits, men who disappeared, plans that changed without warning. But this was different. Brian didn't chase attention. He didn't overpromise. He was here. Again. Still, later, back at the apartment, Charisse laid Nerin down for a nap, while Brian washed his hands and moved quietly around the kitchen. She stepped into the hallway and watched him from the doorway. No noise, no speeches, just a man, drying bottles with care. She walked in and leaned against the counter. "You never asked for credit." He didn't look up. "I'm not doing it for that." "Then why are you still here?" He finally met her gaze. "Because the first love him." Charisse stared. "And you?" she asked. The air went still. "I'm falling in love with the woman who didn't need me, but let me stay anyway." She didn't answer, but her hand reached for his and didn't let go. The next morning, the apartment was still. Nerin was down for his nap. The soft whir of the sound machine played in the background. Charisse sat on the couch with her legs folded under her, staring at the baby monitor and letting her tea go cold. Brian had stayed later the night before. Not overnight, not too far, but long enough to make the silence between them feel different, weightier, softer, warmer. There was no kiss, no declaration, but his words lingered. "I'm falling in love with the woman who didn't need me, but let me stay anyway." And she had let him stay, without a wall, without a warning. He arrived that afternoon with groceries, slipping off his shoes and moving into the kitchen like he belonged. Charisse leaned against the wall, watching him put items in the fridge, noticing how familiar his movements had become. "How did you go from being the man who signed million-dollar contracts to the man who knows where I keep the baby's thermometer?" she asked. He glanced at her, calm. "I started caring about what actually matters. And what's that? Your peace." Later, while Nerin slept again, they sat together on the couch, not far apart, not casual. She had changed into a soft t-shirt and cotton shorts, nothing calculated, nothing for show. Brian was close, but not hovering. When she shifted to rest against his side, he didn't react with surprise. He just made space. His arm came around her shoulders slowly. She let her head settle there. His fingers brushed against her arm. Once, then again. Not possessive, present. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You said you were falling in love." "I meant it. I'm not used to that meaning something without pressure. I'm not here to press." "What are you here for, Brian?" He turned to her, his voice low. "To keep choosing this. Even when it's slow, even when you flinch, even when you question it." She didn't flinch now. Her hand slid across his chest, resting near his collar. Their eyes met, and she kissed him. Quiet, steady, soft. No performance, no fear, only clarity. His hand cupped the back of her neck. Their foreheads touched. Her voice trembled as she said, "Don't hurt me." "I won't," he whispered. "Even if it takes the rest of my life to prove it." They didn't move fast. That night, they didn't cross boundaries. He stayed, but not in her bed. He took the couch, and in the morning, he was still there, holding Nerin so she could shower without rushing for the first time in weeks. Later, as she packed the diaper bag for a short walk, she looked at him and said, "You don't need to keep doing this to prove something." "I'm not," Brian replied. "I'm doing this because I want to live it. With both of you." She held his gaze, then opened the front door. "Then come with us." They walked together, baby between them. No cameras, no crowd. Just steps, and space, and the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled, only shared. It was Friday morning when Brian texted, "My sister's birthday dinner is Sunday. Small, family only. I want you and Nerin there." Charisse stared at the message for a long time. She didn't reply right away. Not because she didn't want to go, but because it was the first time he'd asked her to step fully into his world. Not through a back door, not in silence. This time, with the lights on. They sat together that evening on her balcony, Nerin asleep inside. Charisse finally spoke. "You're sure about this?" "I'm not asking for show," Brian said. "I'm asking for truth. My family's seen headlines, but they haven't seen you." "I'm not worried about the spotlight," she said. "I'm worried about how they'll see me." He turned his head. "They'll see the woman I couldn't forget." Sunday arrived with quiet nerves. Charisse stood in front of the mirror, holding Nerin against her hip, adjusting the wrap of her simple beige dress. Nothing extravagant, just clean lines. Comfortable, presentable. She pinned her hair up and kissed her son's forehead. "This is new for both of us," she whispered. Brian arrived right on time. A navy blazer, no tie, and that now familiar softness behind his eyes. "You look like peace," he said when he saw her. She smiled, small and honest. "Let's see if your family agrees." The house was tucked in the hills, elegant, understated. Brian's sister, Renee, opened the door. She blinked once, then smiled. "You're real," she said to Charisse, then reached out to touch Nerin's hand. "And he's beautiful." Brian stepped in behind them. "Charisse, meet my sister. Renee, this is the reason I disappeared and finally came back different." Renee gave a short laugh. "Then I owe you." They walked in. The gathering was small. Just Renee, her husband, their 2 kids, and Brian's cousin Elise, who had apparently helped raise him. No cameras, no noise. Just dinner, laughter, and curious eyes that didn't judge, only tried to understand. Charisse kept Nerin close, but she didn't retreat. When Elise asked, "How did you two meet?" Charisse didn't flinch. She answered honestly, "We worked in the same building, but it wasn't until the building lost power that he really noticed me." Brian chuckled. She was the only calm one, while everyone else panicked. Elise smiled. "So he didn't pursue you?" Charisse shook her head. He watched. I walked away. The room laughed softly. And for the first time in years, Charisse didn't feel like she had to explain her presence. She felt like she belonged in it. Later, Brian walked her to the car while Nerin slept in her arms. "Renee liked you," he said. "She asked me to bring dessert next time. I think that's her way of saying, don't disappear." He opened the car door for her. "You're not going anywhere." She looked at him before getting in. "Neither are you." He leaned down, kissed her cheek, gently. "Let's build slow. But let's build—" She didn't nod this time. She whispered, "We already are." The next day started slow. Charisse fed Nerin near the window while sunlight filtered through gauzy curtains. Her mind replayed the previous night. Renee's laughter, Elise's quiet approval, Brian's steady presence beside her. She didn't feel tested. She felt received, seen, and for once, her name wasn't attached to shame, secrecy, or someone else's silence. She belonged in his life, and it showed. But not everyone agreed. At 3:14 p.m., there was a knock at Brian's front door. He was home, alone, cleaning up Nerin's playmat after spending the morning with Charisse and the baby. He opened the door without checking, and froze. Standing there was Celine Drew, his ex. Sharp heels, red lipstick, cold eyes. "I called your assistant. She said you were off today," Celine said, stepping forward without being invited. Brian blocked the doorway. "What do you want?" "You haven't returned my messages." "Because we have nothing to talk about." She gave a tight smile. "You're different. I can see it. Softer. Tired. You used to be sharper." Brian's tone dropped. "I'm clearer now." Celine tilted her head. "You've got a woman and a baby now. That what this is?" He didn't answer. So she kept going. "I saw the post. The handwritten noble act. Did she inspire that? Or did guilt finally catch up to you?" Brian didn't flinch. But he didn't let her speak again. "Leave," he said. Celine blinked. "Excuse me?" "Leave my doorstep. Don't come back. You think she's going to protect your image? She's nothing like the women you used to bring around." Brian stepped forward, voice low but sharp. "And that's exactly why she's still here." Charisse stood at her kitchen counter when her phone buzzed. A single message from Brian. "We'll talk tonight, but you need to know someone came by, uninvited. From my past. She won't return." Charisse stared at the message. No explanation, just facts. And accountability. She didn't panic, didn't spiral. She just placed her phone down and exhaled. She had lived too long in fear of men who couldn't face their past. Now she was witnessing one who stood in front of it. That night, Brian arrived with tired eyes and open hands. "She came by," he said, walking in. She pushed. "I stopped her." "I know," Charisse said. "You told me the truth. That was enough. But you deserve more than truth," he said, stepping closer. "You deserve protection." "I'm not asking to be shielded," she said softly. "I'm asking to never be blindsided." "You won't be." "Then, come sit down." They sat on the floor beside Nerin's bassinet. The baby stirred but didn't wake. Brian's voice lowered. "I thought I needed to build an empire to prove I mattered. And now," he looked at her, "I just want to be a man my son respects, and the partner you trust when you're not watching." Charisse leaned her head against his shoulder. "You already are." They stayed like that for hours. No performance, no pressure, just quiet alignment. No past could interrupt what they were now building. Not without breaking against the walls they had decided to hold together. Brian held the door open as Charisse stepped into the building, Nerin tucked into her arms with a sleepy smile. "This isn't a corporate event, right?" she asked, glancing at the high-ceilinged lobby. "No speeches, no press. Just a quiet moment I want you part of," Brian said, his voice calm but certain. They were standing in the lobby of the Wynn Family Foundation, a place Brian rarely mentioned unless paperwork demanded it. It wasn't tied to his image. It wasn't featured on magazine spreads. It was the only space he built that wasn't about power. It was about healing. He led her down a hallway with soft lighting and hand-framed photos on the wall, pictures of local kids, community events, single mothers attending workshops, and a quiet plaque in the back that read, "Built to honor every person who made something out of nothing." Charisse slowed her steps. She wasn't expecting this. "Why bring me here?" she asked. Brian turned to face her. "Because I started this with good intentions but no direction, and now I finally know what it's for." He gestured toward the conference room at the end of the hall. Inside, a small team stood around a table with plans. Brian introduced Charisse with no title, no labels. "This is Charisse, the person who reminded me why this place matters." Charisse didn't speak much. She let her presence speak for itself. Brian listened as one of the women on the team explained a new housing partnership for single parents starting over. When she mentioned a gap in transitional support, Brian looked at Charisse. "Would you help us design something better?" he asked. Charisse blinked. "You want me to?" After the meeting, they sat on a bench in the private garden behind the building. Nerin slept in a carrier strapped to Brian's chest. Charisse's hands rested on her knees. "You didn't start this with me in mind," she said. "No," Brian answered. "But I didn't know then what real strength looked like." She turned to him. "And now?" He smiled slightly. "Now I see it every time I watch you hold our son." Charisse looked down at Nerin, his tiny body wrapped in warmth and peace. "You've changed," she whispered. "So have you." "No," she said. "I've always been this. You just finally looked long enough to see it." Brian didn't argue. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small black box, not a ring, not an announcement. Inside was a gold pendant with a single engraved line, "Chosen." Not claimed. Charisse stared at it, her breath still. "No strings," Brian said. "No pressure, just something I hope you'll wear when you feel strong, and when you forget you are." Charisse took the necklace slowly and placed it in her palm. She didn't put it on. But she didn't close the box either. Later that night, while putting Nerin to bed, she placed the pendant on her nightstand and whispered to her son, "You were never an accident. You were the start of everything honest." She leaned down and kissed his forehead. then stood at the door, looked back at both her son and the man who stayed through the storm, and smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because everything was true. 1 month later, the apartment felt different, not because it had changed, but because Charisse had. There were new things now, a framed photo of Nerin asleep on Brian's chest, a shared calendar on the fridge with both their initials, a folded playpen by the couch for weekends at Brian's house. But most of all, there was ease, not forced, not rushed, just natural. Charisse sipped her tea that morning while watching Brian rock Nerin back and forth in the soft sunlight. He hummed under his breath, focused only on their son. She spoke without planning to. "You're his calm." Brian looked up. "You're the reason I found mine." She smiled softly. "I think we've done something rare," she said. "What's that?" "Built something real in silence, without trying to impress anyone." He stepped closer. "Do you still worry I'll disappear?" "No." "Do you still wait for the other shoe to drop?" "Sometimes," she said honestly. "But then I remember who you became, because you chose to." That afternoon, they returned to the garden behind the foundation. Charisse walked slowly, holding Nerin's hand as he learned to balance. Brian walked beside them, 1 step behind, letting her lead. At the edge of the garden was a bench with a new plaque. Charisse paused. In honor of the woman who redefined what legacy means. She read the words twice before turning to Brian. "I didn't ask for this," she said. "I know. I didn't want recognition." "You didn't get recognition," he said. "You got acknowledgement." She swallowed. "There's a difference?" He smiled. "One's for the world, the other's from me." That night, after Nerin fell asleep between them, Brian held her hand under the blanket. No music, no distractions, just breathing. He turned his head and whispered, "Do you want to move in with me?" Charisse didn't respond right away, not because she was unsure, but because for the first time her answer wasn't coming from fear. It came from clarity. "Yes," she said, "but not because you asked." Brian smiled. "Then why?" "Because you're the place I feel safe saying yes to." The next morning, she wore the pendant. Gold. Simple. Quiet. Like the woman who built a life from one unexpected night. With a man who turned legacy into something intimate, present, and real. What would you do if one night changed everything, and the person you shared it with walked back into your life, not with apologies, but with presence? Charisse never chased love. She never asked for attention, but one night gave her a child, and eventually a man who chose her without pressure, without noise, and without leaving. This wasn't about luxury. This was about legacy, the kind built in baby steps, long silences, and daily effort. If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you that love is more than words, and showing up is stronger than any promise, take a second now. Tap the like button to support more powerful, emotional storytelling like this. Drop a comment below. Have you ever trusted someone again after walking away first? Share this video with a friend who believes in second chances and slow love. And most importantly, subscribe to Mr. Charles Stories right now so you never miss the next one. Because sometimes the quietest stories leave the loudest lessons.